Hello again. Today, I think what we might do is talk about sharpness and talk about how to focus to try and get our images as sharp as we possibly can. And then what we'll do is we'll get into Lightroom and Photoshop. So what we'll do is we'll just skip forward a little bit and get closer to sunset, and then I'll show you some camera settings. And yeah, let's have a look at sharpness today and how we can get some nice sharp images. Okay, so the first thing we want to look at is our lens, and make sure the front of your lens is nice and clean. Any fingerprints, dirt, grime, anything like that can throw your focus out, and that can create a blurry image. Fingerprints will create a smudge in your image, so that will make the image look a little bit soft as well. So step number one, check the front element of your lens, make sure it's nice and clean. Jump online, have a look at your lens brand, and there's plenty of charts out there that will show you where your lens is at its sharpest. As a general rule, most lenses anywhere between 5.6 to f8, even up to f14. The better the lens, the better the sharpness is throughout. So jump online, do a Google search, do a search of your lens, and just have a look at some sharpness charts, and they will show you where your lens performs the best. Now, this video will be specifically for landscapes and seascapes, and specifically with a wide angle lens. A wide angle lens is going to give us a bigger depth of field at a smaller aperture or a smaller f-stop. So I'm going to be shooting at 17mm. 17mm at f8, my depth of field throughout the frame will be fine. Okay, so the more you zoom in, so if we were to shoot at say 40mm, our depth of field will be narrower just because of the focal length we're using. Wide angle lenses are fairly easy to keep nice and sharp throughout the scene, and focusing isn't quite as critical on a wide angle lens as opposed to a telephoto. So once we get up to the 40-50mm, that's where focusing can be more crucial. But today's video is all about the wide angle lens, and I highly recommend. This is simply one of the best lenses as far as I'm concerned for landscape photography. But I'll do another video on why I think a wide angle lens is very good. But for today, let's just look at sharpness, okay? Let's get our images nice and sharp, and I'll show you how we can do that specifically with a wide angle lens. What we've got here, this is going to be a good example of sharpness, and what we're going to do is we're going to have our foreground, our midground, and our background all in focus. And I'm going to show you how I focus. So we've got a nice leading line, a nice rock wall here. And what I'm going to do is essentially focus on the far end of the rock. So in a way, I'm using that hyperfocal distance, but I tend to focus a bit further out into my scene rather than closer into my scene. Okay, I'm not going to cover focus stacking in this. This is all about getting it in one shot and trying to get that focal distance that's a good compromise between foreground and background sharp. Okay, so for starters, we're just going to try and get everything in one shot. I'm not too concerned with what's directly at my feet. I'm going to get from those rocks out there in focus all the way through. Okay, focusing really close, that's where focus stacking comes in. So what I'll do is I'll show you the back of the camera and how I can focus before I even set up. Okay, so here's the back of the camera, and this is the way I do it. Now, mirrorless cameras do make things easier, but this way I find it to be absolutely foolproof because I'm in control of my focus. What I do is I switch it into manual mode. So I focus manually, and then what I do is I use my magnify tool, and what I want to do is focus out on the end of those rocks. So I want to focus out here. So what I do is I magnify in where I want to focus, get it sort of roughly where I want to be, and then I just manually focus until I know those rocks are nice and sharp out the end. Okay, and that's going to, I'm focusing out here. All of this is going to be focus and then all the way out. Now if I switch over to the GoPro, you'll see exactly how far out I am compared to where I'm focusing. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just get framed up, and look, we don't need to be super close to the ground. Being super close to the ground, focus does have to be more critical. Okay, so if you want to get your images nice and sharp throughout the scene, get up nice and high so you're not too close to your foreground. Okay, so essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up right here. Okay, I'm up fairly high, and by being up high, we're not super close to our foreground. Okay, so now I'm focused out on the end of the rock. As you can see from the video how close I am to my foreground, shooting at f14. And as you'll see, like the foreground it'll be sharp enough. Okay, unfortunately the sky is just doing nothing at the moment, so we're not going to see exactly how sharp the sky is, but I don't mind the sky being a little bit soft. Okay, if we've got some nice big puffy clouds up there, then yes, I'm a bit more worried about my sky. So there's a nice wave in there. So big puffy clouds, I would probably focus even further. Prioritize what you want to be sharp. Okay, in my case, I do want this rock wall to be sharp. Okay, the sky's not doing much. I want to try and fill up as much frame as I can with our foreground. And I'm focused out on that end rock. And you have a look at how sharp these images are. The worst thing you can do is focus close. Okay, if you focus close, your depth of field will be completely out. Landscapes and seascapes, focus a bit further into your frame rather than closer. Otherwise, you will need to focus stack. Another thing to note, the higher you bump your ISO, the more sharpness you will lose. Okay, so especially on crop sensor cameras, micro four thirds, you'll find the higher you bump your ISO, you will start to lose sharpness just because you're starting to introduce some grain or some noise. So another thing to be mindful of, if you want super sharp images, try and work at lower ISOs. Now, another key factor for sharpness, especially in landscapes and seascapes, tripod. Tripod 2-second timer, so that way I can hit my shutter, I can let go, the camera's got time to settle, and then after 2 seconds it'll take the shot. So that will keep everything completely still. Even holding your camera, sometimes you can create a little bit of movement, especially at longer shutter speeds. Okay, so if you're working at shutter speeds that are any longer than a 50th of a second, I highly recommend using a tripod. Okay, tripod, keep everything nice and still. I'll just get that wave as it crashes in. That's quite nice. Okay, so if your shutter speed gets too slow, jump on a tripod. Handheld, as a general rule, if you're shooting at 50mm, you want at least a 50th of a second. 100mm, 100th of a second. I'm shooting at 17mm, I'm shooting currently at 1 second. Okay, if I was shooting at a 17th of a second, I could probably handhold. Because I'm slower than a 17th, I'm on a tripod. Okay, so the key is 2-second timer, take the shot, release, or use a remote trigger. If you've got a remote triggers are fantastic. But yeah, this is try and keep it simple without all the gear and unnecessary items. 2-second timer works really well. That will just keep everything still and keep everything nice and sharp. Okay, another thing that is really handy, and I think you should do quite regularly, is review your images. So if we go back to the last image, for example, and if we just hit our magnify button, let's actually zoom in on the photo that we've taken and check our sharpness. Okay, so there I am focused out on the end of that rock. That looks nice and sharp, and if I come all the way down, okay, those rocks in my foreground are nice and sharp as well. Generally that F10 to F14 is a really good place to be for landscape photography. Okay, so yeah, look, not the most epic composition, not the most epic, but practice sharpness. Get out and practice. Try focusing further into your frame, and I think you'll be surprised at how sharp your foreground will be by focusing a little bit further out. I highly recommend using manual focus, okay? Even if you use back button focus, focus on a point. The last thing we want to do is kind of keep focusing after every photo. Once the light dims, focus will be harder to pick up. Okay, so if we're trying to autofocus at night time, that's when you're going to run into issues. Okay, as good as the lenses and cameras are now, it's never going to be 100% accurate. So manual mode, manual focus, zoom in on the point you want to focus on, and that's the way I do it. Okay, I do it all manually, and even when I upgrade to mirrorless, I will still focus manually because I just don't trust autofocus systems. Wildlife, portraits, things like that, completely different. When it comes to landscape, I'm choosing where I want my focus point to be and not relying on the camera to automatically focus where I want it to be. Okay, so now we're coming into blue hour. So this is where a tripod is absolutely essential. A steady tripod, once we've lost heaps of light, tripod is absolutely essential. I'm going to stick it around about that F14 for my depth of field. Trying to keep everything nice and sharp. Okay, so as you can see from the video, it's getting quite dark now. So now our shutter speed is down to if I focus on my foreground, we're getting up around 20 seconds. If it's windy, I do take my lens hood off. The lens hood can catch a little bit of wind. Steady tripod is your best friend. Now the wind is blowing towards the camera, so what I'm going to do, another little trick, is if we just fire off our shot, and then what I'm going to do is actually stand around this side and block the wind from my camera. Okay, so the wind is up my back, I'm acting as a little bit of a windbreak. So you find that if you're shooting in windy conditions, don't be afraid to use yourself as a bit of a windbreak, and that will help stop any sort of movement as well. Okay, especially with long shutter speeds. The longer the shutter speed, the more chance you've got of getting a gust of wind blow your camera. So the wind has picked up quite a bit. Create that shield, okay? Create that shield so the wind isn't blowing on the camera. Now let's have a look at the raw file. So what I'll do is I'll just do a very quick adjustment to it just so we can kind of get a better look at the image, and I'm just going to apply my preset. Okay, so what I'll also do a bit of an exposure blend at the end as well, just so we can make the image look a little bit nicer. But more importantly, let's look at our sharpening. Now by default, Lightroom does apply sharpening. So if we come down to our detail tab, okay, now if I just double click all of these will take it back to the default that Lightroom applies to every image. Okay, so if we zoom down to the bottom of the image, you'll see that that is pretty sharp even at the default. Now, as I mentioned in the video, I focused out on the end of this rock. Now that is pin sharp all the way down to our foreground. Okay, we're sharp all the way down to my feet pretty much. So this coral, which is almost at my feet, is nice and sharp. Okay, so if we take our sharpening all the way down, this is with no sharpening applied at all, we're still sharp throughout our frame. Okay, so I highly recommend focus a little bit further out into your frame rather than closer, especially when using a wide angle lens. Okay, wide angle lenses are very forgiving with focus, so focus further out into your scene, and I think you'll be surprised at exactly how close that your focus will be even when focusing far out into the frame. Now, as far as actual sharpening goes, like I said, this will be the default that comes with Lightroom, and it's fine. Just for uploading to social media, the default sharpening is absolutely fine. But there's lots of options we have in Lightroom. A really good option is our texture and our clarity. So as an example, if I just zoom in here, I'm going to increase this all the way just because the YouTube algorithm will sort of dumb everything down a bit. But just by increasing texture, that does increase sharpness quite a bit. Okay, so just be careful, it will increase grain or noise and will make it look a little bit crunchy. So look, I recommend you don't turn it to 100, but have a play with texture. Okay, so texture is a nice easy way of adding some sharpening without actually touching our sharpening. Similar to clarity. Clarity is like a very aggressive sharpening. So you'll find that the clarity slider will also add sharpening as well, but a bit more aggressively. So those two, if you want to get your image super sharp, you can turn them up a little bit. And if we have a look at our before and our after, you can see that it's made it quite a bit sharper. Okay. Personally, I don't use them for every image. I might sort of apply them sometimes. Okay, occasionally I will do it locally. So what I'll do is I'll grab a brush, generally just a brush tool. And then if we just come down to effects, and then we can just turn up our texture. And then we can just paint it in where we want it. Okay, so that's a good way of just sharpening the areas you want. So if we don't want to sharpen the water, we don't want to sharpen the sky, we can just paint in where we want to sharpen, and then it's only going to affect those areas. Okay, so that is a good option. Personally, all I really do these days is I do it through my detail tab. So I come down to detail. The default is fine, but I tend to just, especially for social media, I sort of crank it up to around about 70 to 80. I turn it up to around about 1.2. I actually bring my detail down a bit. I don't like what the detail does. If I just turn that all the way up, it makes it very crunchy, okay? It increases noise. It just, to me, I don't like what it does. So I tend to turn that down anywhere between 10 to 15. And again, it depends on the image. Some images you want to be sharp, some not so much. And then finally the masking. So with the masking, if I zoom all the way out and I hold my Alt key, when I move this masking slider, everything in white is being sharpened. So as I move this masking slider, everything that's black is not being sharpened. So we're blacking out the sharpening and only the white areas are being affected. So I just find roughly where I want it. Okay, I don't want that blue sky or the clear sky to be sharpened. So somewhere around about there looks pretty good. You know, every image is different. So some you might want to reduce your sharpening a lot. So this is a good way of just sort of sharpening the areas that need to be sharpened and not affecting the sky, for example. And that's how I do my sharpening in Lightroom, okay? Very simple, very effective. Texture is a good option, but personally, I just use the sharpening option down here, okay? And that's roughly where I have it for most of my images. Now, when it comes to printing, I do it differently. When I want to print, I do my sharpening through Photoshop because I just think Photoshop just does a better job and it's a lot easier. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to reset all that sharpening just by double clicking on these. That will take it back to the default. But in this case, what I'm going to do is actually reduce the sharpening to 0. Okay, I don't like the way Lightroom sharpens. I just prefer Photoshop. And again, it's all personal preference. There's no right way, there's no wrong way. Different people apply different sharpening, okay? Some people don't apply any sharpening at all, and it will depend on your lens. Your lens might be super sharp. You might want to reduce your sharpening. But for me, personally, with this lens, like straight out of the camera with no sharpening, it's fine. But when it comes to print, I'll show you what I do to print my images. And what we'll do a very quick exposure blend. So I'm just going to sync all those settings together. Let's at least make the image look nice if we're going to sharpen it. And I'm not going to spend too long on it. Just edit in Photoshop, and then I'll show you how I sharpen in Photoshop. Okay, so we're going to start off with the most basic of exposure blends of all time. I'm just going to grab my gradient filter and I'm just going to black out that sky to reveal what's underneath. So somewhere around about there. Look, not the most accurate greatest blend of all time, but this is about sharpening, not about blending. So what I'm going to do is just flatten that image, and I'll show you how I do my sharpening in Photoshop. So if we just zoom in, I'm going to zoom in so we can see it, and it is this simple and it is this easy. I don't use my high pass filter anymore. I did a video in the past about high pass. High pass is a good option, but these days I just come up to filter, sharpen, smart sharpen. Okay, and I even have a preset in here called landscape, and that's where I'm at 200%. I'm at a radius of 1.2 and reduce noise by 10%. Okay, I think by default it's on lens blur. I'm not exactly sure what that does, but we have this little preview window up here as well, and we can preview on and off. Now, you're not going to notice it on YouTube. The compression in YouTube, you're not going to notice any sharpening, but that's how I do it. That's how I do my sharpening for print. Okay, 200%, radius of 1.2, reduce noise by 10%, and it's a very subtle sharpen. Like I said, if I turn that off and then on, you're not even going to notice it. So I tend to just do a very subtle sharpen. And I find that the smart sharpen, it does everything that Lightroom does. Okay, it masks out the sky. It is literally a smart sharpen. It will just sharpen the areas that need to be sharpened and not affect the parts that we don't want to be sharpened. And then just press OK. And that's it. That is how simple it is to sharpen an image. Get it right in camera for starters. As long as you're nice and sharp in camera, you don't need to apply a lot of sharpening to an image, okay? The worst thing you can probably do is over sharpen, but again, personal preference. If you like that really sharp, crisp look, go for it.
This is how I sharpen my images. So I use Lightroom for social media. I use Photoshop to sharpen for print. Okay, so that's it for this video. Hopefully you did enjoy it. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Feel free to subscribe. Hopefully next time you see me, I will be live. I am going to do a live stream soon, and we're going to have a look at some of my award-winning image challenge photos. Okay, so if you haven't been following that, I'm doing live streams where I'm going to enter a competition next year, and I'm only going to submit photos that I captured during a live stream. So if you want to see those photos, you're only going to see them in my live streams. I'm going to go through all of my raw files, and we're going to pick which images are our favorites. So that'll be next. Like I said, hit subscribe, you'll get notified when I'm about to go live. But in the meantime, thank you for watching, and I will see you soon.
And just to show you that sometimes the most simple locations of all time can still be a nice location. I'll just wait for these kids to walk past, because I don't want them to ruin my magic. I was around on a nice sandy beach before, and then once the people appeared, I had to move because I didn't want to be there, so I had to move off the nice sandy beach. And now I'm on crushed coral, and I've got a hole in the bottom of my foot, and when the crushed coral goes into the bottom of that hole in my foot, it hurts. Now, just on a little side note, as a photographer, as soon as you pull out a camera, be prepared for people to jump in and pull their cameras out and take photos. They tend to follow you around because they think you know what you're doing. Oh, no, it's really hurting my foot. Okay, it helps when you're like built like a tank, because then it's easier to block the camera. So go to the gym, work out, and you'll find that the frame will be a bigger frame to block all that wind. So I go to the gym all the time, as you can probably tell from the live streams. You're a dickhead.